Hawaii has and continues to be under an illegal prolonged occupation. Knowledge of that illegal prolonged occupation by the United States has gained a widespread acceptance and is growing both here and as well as abroad. It is within that context that we have tonight's Sovereignty Dialogues. Good evening. I'm fortunate to host tonight's show, No'o No'o Laula. And I have two guests with me tonight that I'd like to introduce you to, and they will help explain more about that show, To Think Broadly. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Noi Pereira. Dr. Pereira, aloha. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Noelani Pereira, born, raised in Hawaii, Moko Keawe, Pepekeo in the cane fields. I currently reside in between Kailua and Waimanalo. And my day job would be a clinical psychologist in independent practice.
Very good, thank you. And our other guest and co-host is Manu Kayama. Manu, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Aloha, Ke'amoku. Mahalo nui for having me. A little bit about myself is that I'm from the Helenihi Ohana on one side and the Komen Ohana on the other, and I have lived all my life in Kailua, Oahu, and right now in Ka'elepulu. And it's, as a trade, I do work as a CPA. I'm also teach at the University of Hawaii Scheidler College of Business. So it's kind of an unusual, I guess, trade, you could say, or profession to have as a community Kanaka Maoli person who advocates for Hawaiian rights. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you both for appearing on tonight's show. Again, No'o No'o Laula, To Think Broadly. And it's a topic that's very interesting for both myself and I know both of you, especially now that the conversation is becoming more common about occupation and how we deoccupy, and the concern some of our people have in making that transition from what I believe was an ingrained indoctrination and moving towards occupation and deoccupation. I know we're talking about national consciousness, and if I could, maybe perhaps I could just turn that over to both of you to start that discussion about national consciousness.
Okay. Well, when I think of national consciousness, I cannot help but think of that story of my daughter and the day that we went to pick up my tutu, who was 92 years old. So we went, and I think we were going to like this Papaku'iai board and stone in Waimanalo, a class. On the way home, dropping my grandmother off, my daughter looks in the driveway and there's this constellation of flags. And so my grandmother has two of her sons that live with her. So my daughter looks and you have the American flag. Under the American flag there's a black, I think it's a Vietnam prisoner of war flag, and then you have the High Hawaii. And so my daughter, who's 6, says, "Mom, that's wrong." And I wasn't sure what she was referring to, but she was looking at the flags and she said, "High Hawaii is supposed to be on the top." And I said, "Oh, that's right." And so my grandmother, in all her delightful 92-year-oldness, started giggling and said, "Oh," she wanted her to tell my uncle about it.
So your grandmother is kolohe because she was causing trouble, right?
I don't think she really
You don't think
intended
so?
to cause trouble.
Oh, that's cute.
And so I think eventually when we talk about this whole idea of dissonance, that might fit back in. So the short of the story is Uncle comes out to help, my tutu, we call her Apo, get her into the house. And so my grandmother says, tell Uncle. And so, all her delight, her 6-year-old delight, is telling this girl, and I don't know how old my uncle is, probably in the 60s maybe, saying, "High Hawaii is supposed to be on the top." And he looked at her and he said, "That's wrong." And I was like, and I looked at her and I said, "No, baby, that's correct. High Hawaii is on top." And so it proceeded to be like this uncomfortable exchange. And when I think of national consciousness, we have a 6-year-old here who is just matter-of-factly saying that we're Hawaii. And then I have my mother's brother who has been born and raised in Hawaiian territory and has fought for America in the Vietnam War and is here today. And so when you think of national consciousness, like really, what does that mean for everyone, you know, even within one ohana? And so in terms of different generations, for my daughter, I believe it was 10 years ago when I first learned, as a matter of fact, not as a matter of culture or as a matter of history or as a matter of social science, but as a matter of fact of law, that Hawaii is its own territory based on, and there have been legal analysis written up and there have been many discussions like you had mentioned earlier. I was like, whoa. So for me as a parent, as a makua of a keiki, I can say with confidence to my 6-year-old that we're in Hawaii, and when her daddy needs to go to America, San Francisco, then daddy's going to America, and then when he comes, it's easy for the 6-year-old, and it's easy. It sits okay in my na'au because it's a fact. Now, socially, educationally, politically, there's so much to be really clarified. And how do we do it in a way that is safe, in a way that's respectful, in a way that allows us to honor those who have gone before us? I think national consciousness a lot has to do, I'd like to think, with having those kinds of internal conversations before we can really continue dialogues such as this. And actually, it is refreshing because when you have a basis of fact of law, for me as a parent, I don't believe that I'm educating my daughter in a confusing way. It's clear how we articulate
Right.
it in day-to-day life. I think that's, you know, using the word nationality as opposed to ethnicity. Things, a lot of that, we had
Right.
some conversations.
Right.
Manu, any comment on that?
Well, some of the conversation that we had that I think is really on task is the idea of vocabulary and using the right words, and how important and crucial that ends up being for our people. And many times, because we work in these groups and we work and we talk and we have conversations with each other, we'll have people saying certain things, and we'll be able to, because we're friends, be able to say, well, you mean this. You know, when you say it, like, don't say you're decolonizing your mind, because technically we were never a colony. So we'll make those small and very respectful corrections. And I think it's really important that we're in a point now in our national consciousness to be able to do that respectfully and to get people to be thinking. You know, I like your story because it talks about your keiki and her awareness and how different her awareness and her level is at 6 years old versus ours at different ages. And it's true, though, we need to give credit where credit's due, that there are generations of people that kept holding that high Hawaii high and saying, you know, no, we're an independent nation and we're an independent nation. And we do stand on their shoulders. But we have to admit that it isn't, it hasn't been until recently in the last 20 years where with the Renaissance and with all of these activities happening where people have become more aware of where we are and where we sit in the family of other friendly nations. And so using the correct terms is really, really important. Kekuni, for example, was way before us. You know, he is the one who taught me America, continent, versus Hawaii, the mainland. Meaning Hawaii is the mainland because we live here. And you know, in the beginning that I heard that, I thought, wow, that was so foreign to my ears and to my psyche. But I loved it because it was true. Like you said, it's based in truth. If I've lived here all my life, this is my mainland. Why am I relegated because I live in islands to the occupying nation, which is so huge on the side? You know, they're America, and for them, they are their mainland. Right. For Hawaii, and as Kanakamole and as a Hawaiian national, this is my mainland. So vocabulary is super, super important in looking at levels of consciousness. And you said something that was interesting when we were talking, the idea that Hawaii, the nation, is not an aspiration, it exists. And that's really along lines of what you do in your work, right, Ke'omoku?
Yes. And interesting, not only using the words, but it also brings up another topic. How do we, with this new knowledge, with this, as I would say, the next evolution of this legal renaissance, how do we make those who have been, and for lack of a better word, ingrained for so long, how do we bring this information to them in a manner so which that they can at least sit back, review the information, and not become and feel in a safe environment, I think, as you explained it. How do we now, in addition to using the correct vocabulary, how do we make this something that's a topic that they can actually become aware of, or at least become safe in trying to consider? So how do we do that?
As you're saying that, it makes me think of Tiffany, my sister, and and Uncle Sunny Kekelani in Waimea on the Big Island. And she was, I hope I'm not going to get sued for unauthorized use of her story. She always teases me about that. But really, as you're saying that, how do we have the conversations? She was sharing with Uncle Sunny, like, oh, wow, it's just so, I'm not sure that I want to be in these conversations, and it had to do with Mauna Kea and et cetera. And he said, it's not your job to make anybody change or make anybody do anything. It's your job to just be present and have that Hawaiian consciousness and presence in the midst of all of this conversation. So from a national consciousness perspective, and creating safe environments to having conversations, everyone's timing is going to be different.
Right.
And everyone's life experience is different. And as I was listening to you, Manu, and thinking about, for me, I remember, seeing Haunani Kea Trask and saying, I'm not American, I'm not American, I'm not American, in very, very much strong language, and fighting for our lives, basically. And in that space and time, that was important, and we needed that. We didn't necessarily have the research, the law, the clarity of we're Hawaii based on X, Y, and Z. There is no treaty. There is these pieces of information that have surfaced recently do provide more foundation for a conversation that, rather than feeling like we have to and we are fighting for our lives, we can say it in no uncertain terms now, that we're Hawaii,
Right.
America's over there.
Right.
And ideally, my daughter's coming again, story, asking my sister, who's your po'okumu? Asking who's your boss. So ideally, all our po'okumu of Hawaii can receive this information and shift and be able to have the conversation of nationality is not about ethnicity. Our Hawaii is about citizenship. It doesn't mean I'm Puerto Rican, Portuguese, Hawaiian, Chinese. My ancestors come from different nations in one slice of time. Today, Hawaii, it is clear, we're our own territory, we're our own nation, we have our own constitution, we have very much a structure and a civil code, a legal code. So there's everything in place. This is not just in theory, this is in fact. Mm-hmm. From an international, Manu, like you were saying, there are other friendly nations who stand by their own laws that have to do with being human beings, concerned about our environment, concerned about our keiki, our mo'opuna. And so if we come from the basis of nationality and clarity that our nationality is Hawaiian, not ethnic Hawaiian, but the territory of Hawaii, ideally all our po'okumu can start to create enough safety internally to consider that information.
I so agree with you, you know,
Me
because
too, me too.
when
Awesome.
when you think about it, and one of the ideas that you were sort of hinting at is the idea of we have now articulated a basis in law. And that's important because we went from basically, you know, under occupation where we were the grateful native to be saved, to the thought process of decolonization, and maybe somehow we were a colony and we needed to be decolonized, our minds needed to be freed of this idea that we're a second-class citizen, to now, with more recent research and study and scholarship, to the idea, and that can be based in fact, that we're talking about prolonged occupation. So when we look at prolonged occupation, I think one of the things you were getting at, which I so agree with, is the idea that this is now a safe place. We have a body of law to support what we say, and that helps the conversation. It helps take the emotion out of the conversation. And so when we can stop, people cannot, our detractors can no longer say, they're just a bunch of angry Hawaiians, or they're just a bunch, and they clothe us with their preconceived idea of who we are, which we are not those people. We can now say, look, this is the facts. And I'm not an angry Hawaiian. I mean, I might be upset about some things, you know, and I'm expecting justice. But these are the facts. So let's have a conversation, because we can take the emotion out of the dialogue. And I think that's crucial, that we be able to go there, and we can go there. And that's frightening for people who have based their entire argument against us based on our emotion. You know, it's frightening for them, and they need to feel safe, because whether they like it or not, whether they're Kanaka Maoli or not, whether they are Aboriginal from this place or they're settlers, they will have to deal with the fact that our nation exists. So the sooner they get the information, the sooner they learn, the sooner that they become educated, we'll be able to have a productive dialogue. You see what I'm getting at?
I agree with you. But along those lines, I'm also looking at, for myself, a way of encouraging our people who become aware of this information to also get involved, and how maybe this information also helps their psychological, intellectual, emotional well-being. How this information actually props them up instead of puts them down. And for example, I know we've had some discussion about sometimes our information, our discussions are termed in the framed or framed as counter-narrative, whereas really it is the mainstream narrative, and everything else is counter-narrative, and how we need to start to frame all our conversations in that context, so that not only do we, because it is the right way to frame it, because we are in fact the mainstream narrative, everything else is in fact counter, but how that helps our people as far as when we frame it in that text, it helps their emotional, psychological, mental well-being. Any comment on that? And the reason, maybe if I may interrupt you, is because not only do we need to provide a safe place for them, which we're doing, but we need to also empower them, because at some point we may need them to engage others as well. So we may need to prepare them with this information, not only because it's a safe place, but at least empower them to actually take on and maybe get into those discussions, maybe to get into those confrontations which are necessary in moving us along.
Oh, that's huge. Well, when you talk about what is the main, what was the word you used?
Mainstream.
Mainstream narrative. So here I go in my stories again.
You so Kanaka Maoli with your mo'olelo. It's so maikai.
It's good.
Well, I'm not sure which year it was. It was a couple of years ago. Took my daughter back home to Panaewa, and it was during Merry Monarch time. And Keikuhi and Tangaro were organizing the I know, Kalamai, if I'm going to get any of this wrong, but the image that I got when you're talking about the mainstream narrative and the counter narrative was that Merry Monarch, and having a whole group of, from very youngsters to very oldsters to me, who I'm back home after being, you know, on Oahu for a lot of years. I mean, I go back and forth. And conversations about orienting, and then I'm shifting to conversations with my sister about orienting yourself to, you know, who you, where you from, and how you know where you are. Well, you orient yourself naturally. Well, I cannot say you. I know that I do, and in talking to my, you know, my siblings over the years, we orient ourselves to which way is east, which way is north, which way is south. And so at that opening of the Merry Monarch that particular year, we learned this chant, and it was orienting yourself to standing in Hilo, you know, hi 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 kua, and I don't remember it, but what I do remember, I don't remember the words. If I hear it, I remember the feeling. I remember, okay, I understand that's, they're saying the sun rises over there in the east and it sets over there to, you know, in the west, and, you know, Kalai is down there, it's over here. And so when you're talking about narratives and what's the mainstream, to someone who orients themselves to the world that way, yeah, that's how. But I think in academia, in politics, on Oahu, for me, on Oahu, my life experience, not a lot of people orient themselves. For real, we grew up in the bushes, in the cane fields, you know. I mean, you want to look which way the sun is coming up, where Mauna Kea was the orienting point.
Right.
I know by looking up the shape of Mauna Kea, which side of the island I'm on. So these are my reference points and my mainstream. Then I guess your question in how do we help other people orient themselves, or, see, that's my word, considering Hawaii as the mainstream rather than the American or whatever we've been taught. I think that has to come from in your na'au, how you, when you wake up, wherever you are, how you situate yourself. And so before we can have intellectual conversations about it, even political conversations or educational conversations, or even sometimes when I'm working with people, I gotta go, okay, so the psychobabble term for this is da-da-da-da-da, but really it's this. And so first internally orienting ourselves to where we sit in this discussion, because it's, so that whole idea of cognitive dissonance, you know, when we can be comfortable in our own skin about, you know, my dad's Irish, my mom's Hawaiian, how do we, I think that before we can consider which is the mainstream narrative, we have to get into our pono place and articulate that internally for ourselves, because if I can do that for myself, then I can communicate with more clarity with you know, my kane, my titas, my mo'opuna, whomever, before I can be the po'okumu of department of this or department of that or the justice da-da-da-da.
Right,
It
right.
comes from there. So I don't know if I answered your
Any
question.
comment, Manu?
Well, you know, I totally agree with Tita, because, you know, I mean, when we look at that, so much of our enlightenment starts inside, and then that empowerment of realizing we're not the counter narrative, we are the main guy, we're the main narrative. But then again, that also needs coaxing, and that needs for people to sometimes just give us the idea, like you mention it, and then it lets me think differently. Now, I've always done this and made this mistake geographically, and I've always thought, like, you know, north, south, east, west, and I've always thought east is California and west is Asia, and I've always thought that. But, you know, then what we learn in school, of course, is, you know, there's the east coast of America and there's the west coast of America, and so the orientation is different. So even things like that, I have just, I think it's from my mother because she is really strong and very much pro Hawaii, had taught me that, we are the piko and the center. So I do think it comes from somewhere. I think that some of my ideas, I can say I've come up with a few that have been original, but most of them have come from the people who I have learned from before me, if it was my mom or my dad or Ohana, or even, kumu that I was able to study under, if it was in halau hula or oli practice, or even the kumu that I had in school, while getting my degrees and things like that. So we do need inspiration from somewhere to then start, I think, to build that core change and that perspective of why are we thinking that this is attractive to put the blue, and we talked about that, put the blue, what is that thing called, contact lens, rather than the brown contact lens. Who taught us that? Who taught us that? We need to change the way we see ourselves and how we think, and everything down to just little things like that we take for granted, that we actually has always pushed us to marginalize who we are as a people.
Well, if I may comment, and I know we're ending the show, for me, I look at it this way. My experiences is that our people have been subjected to the wrong information for so long. And because of the information that they've been subjected to, it's actually, for the worse, changed their personality. It's had an effect on them from a psychological, mental, physical well-being. I think this mainstream narrative, now the facts that are coming out, is not only is having, I think, a beneficial effect on our people. Not only are they becoming more empowered because they have the right information, but they're feeling better about themselves. So that's what I was looking at, is that the mainstream narrative is actually helping our people regain not only their physical and mental well-being, but their stature. And because of that, they're willing, and because of their confidence, the next phase is not only, now they've had their safe place, now the next phase is to help them engage. And that's where I was looking at. That was the comment that I was hoping to make. We actually, the time went by
just
flying.
ran out of time.
And I'm sorry, there isn't much time left to comment, but I really thank you, Noi, for being on the show and for giving us your ike manao and some great mo'olelo. So, and thank you, Manu, as always, to provide us clarity on the show.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining the show tonight. You've had another episode of the Sovereignty Dialogues. Mahalo and aloha.
Mahalo.
What you want? Yeah. Hawaiians, tell me what you need. Yeah. Trying to take what the Kanaka Maoli got. Yeah. Just to satisfy the government's greed. Hawaiians, tell me what you want. Yeah. Kanaka Maoli, tell me what you need. Yeah. We must never forget what our kupuna taught. Yeah. Even if I have to bleed. The educator, mana'o deeper than a crater. You should've known by now that I'll be back sooner or later. With even greater, mana, you know they didn't wanna ever go down while they see us rising like an elevator. But it's time for the indigenous uprise. I see the fire burning in the children's eyes. Another freeway.